15 guns surrounded the ranch, but the outlaw's bride refused to run. Before we dive in, tell me where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. This one's about love, redemption, and the kind of courage that won't die quietly. The winter sun hung low over the Montana plains, a white disk through blowing dust. 15 rifles aimed at the weather-worn cabin below. On the porch stood Evelyn Hart, gun trembling in her hands, breath rising in icy clouds. Inside, Silas McKenna, the giant who had saved her, bled onto the pine-board floor. And out front, the man she'd once been promised to sat high in his saddle, smiling like the devil come to collect. "If I can't own you, Evelyn," he called, "no one will." His finger tightened on the trigger. That was the moment everything changed. 3 weeks earlier, the wind was her only companion when Evelyn stumbled out of the sagebrush and into the open valley. She had been running for 2 days straight, coat torn, wedding dress stuffed in a saddlebag she'd stolen before fleeing Miles Cross, the richest land baron this side of the Missouri. The hem of her skirt was stiff with blood, her own, from the night she'd broken a window and leapt into the dark. She was 29, a widow for 4 years, and tonight she had nearly become property again. The horizon blurred, her knees buckled, she tasted iron, dirt, and despair, and then she saw it, smoke curling from a lone cabin beside a half-frozen creek. She staggered toward it, every step a prayer. By the time she reached the fence, her strength gave out. The last thing she saw was a massive silhouette framed by firelight, moving toward her through the snow. When she woke, she was wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled of leather and pine. The cabin was small but warm, a fire snapping in the hearth, and beside it sat a man whose sheer size made the chair look frail, broad-shouldered, scarred, silent. His hair was streaked with gray, though he couldn't have been more than 35. "You always break into strangers' homes," he said, voice low as thunder. Evelyn tried to sit up, failed, and winced. "If I'd had a choice, I'd have broken into heaven instead." That earned her a flicker of something in his storm-colored eyes. Humor, maybe, or pity. He poured water into a tin cup and offered it. "Drink, then tell me who's chasing you?" She obeyed, the cold water slicing through her parched throat. "My name's Evelyn Hart. I was meant to marry Miles Cross, but I ran before the vows. He'll come for me." Silas's jaw worked. "Cross owns half the banks in this territory. And thinks he owns the rest of us," she whispered. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded toward the blanket. "You can stay till you can stand. After that, you decide, north to Canada or wherever fools think they're safe." "I'm not going back," Evelyn said. "Not ever." Something in her voice made him look up sharply. "Then you'll need to learn how to shoot." He rose, and she finally saw how enormous he was. 6'7", maybe more. His shadow swallowed the firelight. He moved with the weary precision of a soldier. Later, she'd learned he'd fought in the war between the states, had lost a brother, a home, and nearly his sanity. But that night, all she saw was a man who carried sorrow like armor. For 3 days, she healed. He slept in the barn, cooked in silence, and avoided looking at her longer than a heartbeat. Yet she felt him everywhere, the creak of his boots outside, the scrape of his axe splitting wood, the low murmur when he cursed the stubborn stove. Each sound stitched her back to life. On the 4th morning, she stepped outside wearing one of his shirts belted at the waist. The valley spread wide and white under a bruised sky. Silas was breaking a wild mare near the corral, muscles coiling as he fought the reins. Evelyn watched, spellbound. The animal bucked. He held. When the mare finally yielded, he stroked her muzzle with a gentleness that stole Evelyn's breath. He turned then and saw her. His eyes traveled from her bare feet in the snow to the defiant lift of her chin. "You should be inside," he said. "I've been inside long enough," she answered. "If I'm staying, I work." "You're not strong enough yet." "Then teach me." A slow exhale. "All right, but my land doesn't forgive mistakes." That afternoon she learned what survival meant, hauling water until her arms shook, sweeping the floor until her hands blistered. She gritted her teeth and kept going. When the sun sank, she collapsed on the steps, tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on her face. Silas crouched beside her, examining her torn palms. "You did good," he said softly. "It hurts. It will, till it doesn't." He uncorked a small tin of solve and rubbed it gently into her hands. His touch was careful, almost reverent. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Because someone once helped me," he said. "And because you remind me of her." "Your wife?" "My sister." His voice roughened. "She married a man like Cross. Didn't live long." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Just don't make her mistake." "I won't," she promised, meeting his gaze. "No man will ever own me again." Silas nodded once, eyes darkening. "Good." Days turned into rhythm. Work, eat, rest, work again. Yet beneath the routine, something electric grew. She caught him watching her while she hung laundry. He caught her staring when he mended fences. The silence between them thickened until even the air felt dangerous. One evening, she slipped on a patch of ice, nearly falling. His arm shot out, catching her around the waist, hauling her upright. For one suspended second, they stood chest to chest, breath mingling in the cold. His hand lingered at her hip before he stepped back, jaw tight. "Careful," he murmured. "Ground's treacherous." "So am I," she said, before she could stop herself. A spark flashed in his eyes. Want, surprise, maybe both. Then he turned away. That night, unable to sleep, Evelyn wrapped herself in a blanket and stepped onto the porch. Moonlight silvered the prairie. Silas stood by the corral, shirtless, the scars on his back glowing pale. He turned when he heard her. "You should be resting," he said. "So should you." He huffed a laugh that wasn't quite amusement. "Can't sleep. Too many ghosts." "Maybe ghosts need company," she said quietly, walking to stand beside him. For a while they listened to the wind. Then he spoke, voice barely audible. "When Cross comes, he won't come alone. Men like him never do. He'll bring papers, rifles, maybe lawmen in his pocket. You still think you can fight that?" "Yes." Silas looked down at her, something fierce and tender battling in his gaze. "Then I'll teach you." He fetched a revolver, small, worn, the grip smoothed by years of use. "This was my sister's," he said, handing it to her. "She never got the chance." The metal was cold and heavy. He stepped behind her, adjusting her stance, his hands covering hers. "Breathe in, exhale slow. Don't pull the trigger, squeeze it." She did. The recoil jolted her back against his chest. His arms closed around her instinctively, steadying her. "Good," he murmured near her ear. "Again." They practiced until the stars blurred, each shot steadier than the last, each breath more in sync. When they finally stopped, her hands ached, but she smiled through the smoke. "How did I do?" "Better than most men I served with," he said, pride softening his features. The compliment warmed her more than the fire ever could. "Thank you, Silas," she whispered. He reached out, brushed a stray curl from her cheek. "Don't thank me yet." Their eyes met, and the world seemed to still, the wind, the stars, everything. His thumb lingered at her jaw, and she leaned into it, heart pounding. "Evelyn," he said her name like a warning and a prayer. "Yes? If we cross this line, there's no going back. Then let's not go back." He exhaled sharply, stepped closer, and kissed her. It was not gentle. It was years of loneliness colliding with raw need, his mouth claiming hers, her fingers fisting in his shirt. The world dissolved into heat and breath, and the faint taste of gunpowder. When he finally pulled away, both were shaking. "We should stop," he rasped. "If I don't, I won't." "Then don't," he groaned, pressing his forehead to hers. "You have no idea what you're doing to me." "Maybe I do," she whispered, and kissed him again. But before desire could swallow reason, he tore himself away, pacing like a caged wolf. "Not now, not like this, not with blood coming." "Blood?" He looked toward the dark horizon. "Cross will find you, maybe sooner than we think." Evelyn straightened, fear replaced by resolve. "Then we prepare." He studied her, a preacher's widow, hands still raw from work, eyes blazing with defiance, and something like pride flickered across his face. "All right," he said quietly. "We prepare." The next dawn painted the sky crimson. Silas was already outside, firing at tin cans along the fence line. Evelyn watched from the porch, the crack of each shot echoing across the valley. This was no gentle rancher now. This was a man built for war. She felt awe and something deeper, more dangerous. He glanced back, saw her watching, and smiled faintly. "You're up early. Hard to sleep through a war," she said. "Not a war yet," he replied, loading another round. "But soon." He gestured to the smaller revolver on the table. "If you meant what you said last night, pick it up." She did, and for the first time, the weapon felt less like metal and more like promise. "Breathe," he said. "Aim again." Her bullet hit dead center. He lowered his rifle, eyes meeting hers. "Looks like the preacher's widow just became a gunslinger." Evelyn smiled, fierce and unafraid. "Looks like she did." Before we go on, if you believe every woman deserves the right to stand her ground, hit that subscribe button. These stories keep our history and our courage alive. As the wind howled across the plain and the distant thunder of hooves began to rise, Evelyn Hart knew the battle for her freedom, and for the man who had taught her its price, had just begun. The wind had a way of whispering warnings across the Montana plain. By the second night, even the horses grew restless, their ears twitching toward the distant ridge. Evelyn Hart could feel the coming storm before the first shot was ever fired. Inside the cabin, the lamplight flickered over rifle oil, spent shells, and the map Silas had sketched across the table, marking where he thought they'd hit first. "They'll come from the south," he said, tapping a calloused finger along the penciled ridge. "The creek bends that way, and the rocks give cover. If Cross hired trackers, they'll follow the water." Evelyn loaded a cartridge into her revolver and snapped the cylinder closed with new assurance. "Then we make the creek their grave." Silas looked up, that rare smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You talk like a soldier." "I talk like someone tired of running." The candle guttered as wind clawed at the shutters. He reached across the table, his rough hand covering hers. "Evelyn, if this goes bad—" "It won't. You get to the barn, take the mare, follow the north trail. Don't stop until you reach Helena." She shook her head, hair catching firelight like copper wire. "I'll be damned if I ride off while you bleed out behind me." Something in her certainty silenced him. The room seemed smaller suddenly, heavy with the things they hadn't said. He squeezed her hand once, then let go. "Then we stand together. Before we go further, if you believe love is worth standing your ground for, go ahead and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next." By dawn, the sky was pewter. They spent the morning burying powder kegs beneath the fence line, stringing wire through brush, turning the quiet ranch into a snare. Every hammer tap echoed like a drumbeat. When they stopped to rest, Silas handed her a canteen and sat beside her on the frost-hard ground. "You ever seen a battle?" he asked. "Only from the losing side," she said. "When Cross's men came to collect debts, they burned the fields first. My father called it business. I called it war." He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on some far-away memory. "You learn fast, Evelyn Hart. Faster than most men I knew in uniform." "That's supposed to be a compliment?" "It's the only kind I give." The faintest laugh escaped her, light, unexpected, and so human that for one heartbeat, the looming fight felt almost distant. That night the air turned sharp enough to cut skin. Evelyn couldn't sleep. She stepped outside, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and found Silas sitting on the porch, rifle across his knees, watching the stars. The moon painted him silver and shadow. "You'll freeze out here," she murmured. "Been colder," he said. "In Tennessee once, winter of '63. Thought I'd die with a musket frozen to my hands. Yet here you are." He glanced at her, the ghost of a smile flickering. "Here we are." She sat beside him. For a long time they said nothing. The silence wasn't empty. It was alive with crickets, wind, and the slow thud of their hearts. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "You think God still listens to folks like us?" "Maybe," he said, "but I figure he's got his hands full. Out here we make our own mercy." Evelyn turned to him. "Then make some with me." He looked startled, then weary, as if the words hurt and healed all at once. "Evelyn, I'm done being owned by fear. Tomorrow might kill us both. I don't want to die wishing I'd been brave enough to love you." The blanket slid from her shoulders. She reached for him. For a heartbeat he resisted, the soldier at war with the man. But when his hand closed around the back of her neck, the decision was made. His kiss was slow this time, reverent, a promise instead of a claim. When they parted, his breath trembled against her skin. "After this fight," he whispered, We build something worth living for. The third sunrise bled crimson through the horizon. From the ridge came a faint metallic glint. Riders, 10, maybe 15. Cross's banner, black and gold, snapped in the wind. They found us, Silas said. Evelyn tightened her gun belt. Then let's greet them. They took positions, Silas by the porch rail with his Winchester, Evelyn behind the wagon where the barrels were buried. The horses thundered closer, snow spraying beneath their hooves. Cross rode in front, his white coat gleaming like arrogance. "Silas McKenna!" he bellowed. "I've warrants in my pocket and men with itchy fingers. Hand over the woman and keep your skin." Silas stepped out onto the porch, rifle leveled. "Your papers mean less than the dust under my boots." Cross laughed. "You really think you can stand against me?" "I don't stand alone." At that, Evelyn rose from cover. Her revolver gleamed in the pale sun. "You'll have to shoot through me first." A murmur rippled through the riders, disbelief, then anger. Cross's grin curdled. "You'd die for him?" "I'd live for him," she said. "That's worse news for you." Cross's face twisted. His hand jerked up. The first volley roared. Wood splintered. Smoke filled the air. Silas fired twice, dropping 2 riders. Evelyn hit a third before diving behind the wagon as bullets shredded the wheels. The buried charges went off in sequence, booms shaking the ground, horses screaming, men scattering. When the dust cleared, half of Cross's men lay still. The survivors regrouped behind boulders, firing wild. Silas reloaded methodically, calm in the storm. Evelyn covered the flank, each shot cleaner than the last. The hours of training had become instinct. She no longer trembled. Then a scream tore the air, one of the men rushing the porch. Silas swung his rifle, fired, and the attacker fell mid-stride. But another bullet found its mark. Silas staggered, crimson blooming across his coat. Evelyn's heart seized. "Silas!" He caught himself against the post, gritting his teeth. "Still breathing?" "Not for long if you stand there." She dragged him inside, shoved him behind the overturned table, and snatched his rifle. Through the haze she saw Cross dismounting, moving up the slope alone, expression murderous. He called her name like a curse. "You think he'll save you, widow? You're mine." "Not anymore." She fired. The bullet tore through his shoulder. He stumbled but didn't fall. Fury made him faster. His next shot clipped the doorframe inches from her head. Evelyn ducked, fired again, missed. The gun clicked empty. Cross kicked the door open, bleeding, snarling. "End of the road, darling!" Behind him, Silas rose, pale, grim, shotgun steady. "That's my line." He pulled the trigger. The blast hurled Cross backward through the doorway and into the snow. Silence crashed down, broken only by the hiss of powder smoke. Evelyn dropped the revolver and crawled to Silas. He was fading fast, blood soaking through the bandage she'd tied that morning. "Stay with me," she begged, pressing her hand to the wound. He tried to smile. "Did we win? We're alive. That's enough." Outside, the last of Cross's men were fleeing, those not that buried by their own greed. The valley fell still again. The doctor from the nearest town arrived by evening, hauled in by 2 ranchers who'd seen the smoke. He stitched Silas without a word, poured whiskey down him, and said, "If stubbornness keeps a man breathing, he'll live." Evelyn sat through the night, holding Silas's hand, counting each heartbeat. When dawn touched the window, his eyes opened. "You still here?" he rasped. "Someone had to keep you from dying." He managed a rough chuckle. "Figures you'd boss me back from the grave." She laughed and cried all at once, bending to kiss his forehead. "You promised me something worth living for. Don't you dare back out now." "I intend to keep every word." Weeks later, snow melted into mud and wildflowers. The cabin stood patched but strong. Silas's limp remained, a reminder of the day they earned their peace. One afternoon, while she was hanging laundry, a rider approached, martial low, badge gleaming, papers in hand. "Got some news," he said. "Cross's holdings are forfeit. Turns out half his warrants were forged. Territory court cleared you both." Evelyn exhaled, dizzy with relief. "Then it's done." "Almost," the marshal said, a wry grin touching his mouth. "If you two plan to keep living under one roof, the church might appreciate a ring or 2 exchanged. Saves questions later." Silas stepped onto the porch behind her, still bandaged but smiling. You proposing for me, Marshall? Just saving you paperwork. Evelyn looked up at him. Well? He held her gaze, eyes soft as the western sky. Guess it's official then. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a simple silver band he'd hammered from a spent bullet casing. Figured we could turn a little death into something that lasts. Her throat tightened. Silas McKenna, you sure know how to make a woman say yes. Then say it. Yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, kissed her slow and sure, while the prairie wind carried away the ghosts of every fight they'd ever survived. If you believe love can bloom even after the smoke clears, tap that like button and share this story with someone who still believes in second chances. That night, they danced barefoot on the porch. No music, but the whisper of grass and the creak of old boards. The stars watched silently as the outlaw and the widow moved together. Two souls stitched by battle, healed by grace. And when dawn finally broke, the light touched a ranch no longer haunted by fear, but blessed by the kind of love that could outlast war itself. The wind changed with the seasons, but the scent of gunpowder never truly left the soil. Years later, when summer rolled down from the high country, Evelyn McKenna could still feel the ghosts of that winter in the ground beneath her boots. The earth remembered, so did she. The ranch had grown since those days, 5 sturdy buildings now, not one. Cattle grazed. Where once there had been blood, and laughter echoed where gunfire had thundered. Children's laughter, their laughter. Silas came limping across the yard, carrying their youngest on his shoulders, a dark-haired girl with eyes too bright to fear anything. Evelyn leaned against the porch rail, a faded blue dress rippling in the breeze. He caught her watching and grinned, the same slow grin that used to undo her. You keep looking at me that way, woman, he teased, and I might forget I'm supposed to be fixing that corral. You're supposed to be teaching our daughter not to climb the windmill, she shot back. Reckon she learns faster than her old man. The child giggled as he swung her down. Evelyn watched them, father and daughter, then turned her gaze toward the valley. Sunlight poured like honey across the grass. It was hard to believe the same ground had once been a battlefield. Harder still to believe that the woman she'd been, the frightened widow running from a man's claim, had become this. Ranch wife, mother, survivor. But the land had taught her something the church never had. Life grew strongest where it had once been burned. That evening, as the family gathered around supper, 2 boys bickering good-naturedly, their sister stealing bread while Silas pretended not to see, Evelyn felt the quiet fullness of peace settle over her. The storm was long gone, but its memory kept her grateful. After the children were asleep, she and Silas sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. The night smelled of pine and river water. A wolf howled somewhere on the far ridge. Been thinking, Silas said. We could sell off the east pasture, buy more horses. Might be time to build that schoolhouse you wanted. You mean the one you said was impossible? She teased. He chuckled, the sound low and easy. I've learned not to bet against you. Evelyn smiled. You'd lose every time. He looked at her for a long while, eyes soft in the lamplight. You ever miss the city? Not one day. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Out here, every sunrise feels like forgiveness. But peace on the frontier was a fragile thing. 3 nights later, a knock came just after dusk. Silas opened the door to find a stranger, a young deputy, hat in hand, dust on his boots. Evening, Mr. McKenna. Sorry to trouble you. Marshal Lowe sent word. There's been a killing up in Miles Cross. Seems one of Cross's cousins has taken charge of what's left of his estate, mean sort, stirring up the old gang again. Evelyn stiffened. After all these years? The deputy nodded. They're looking for revenge. Marshal thought you ought to know. Silas's jaw tightened. Tell the marshal I appreciate the warning. When the rider left, Evelyn turned to him. They won't stop, will they? They will, he said quietly. One way or another. That night she barely slept. The sound of crickets outside reminded her of gunfire, of hooves pounding through the dark. At dawn she rose, lit the stove, and brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Silas joined her silently, his limp more pronounced in the morning chill. I should go to town, he said finally, see what's true and what's talk. I'm coming with you. He opened his mouth to argue, then saw her eyes and thought better of it. Fine, but if trouble shows its face, you ride home fast as you can. You still giving me orders after all this time? Some habits die hard. Good thing stubbornness does too. Miles Cross hadn't changed much. Same saloon with the broken window, same church with paint peeling under the sun. But the people looked different now, older, quieter. And when Evelyn walked through town beside Silas, they stared, not in judgment, but in respect. The widow who'd defied the richest man in the territory had become legend. Inside the marshal's office, Lowe looked up from his desk. "Well, if it ain't the McKennas, heard you were living the quiet life." "Trying to," Silas said. "What's the trouble?" Lowe sighed. "Cross's cousin, Eamon Cross, mean drunk, no brains. Took over what's left of the old ranch, swore he'd finish what Miles started. Claims you stole land that's rightfully his." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "The land Miles took from others? That's rich. Reckon he'll come calling soon," Lowe continued. "Just wanted you ready." Silas nodded. "We'll be ready." Outside, the afternoon wind kicked dust across the street. Evelyn looked up at the sign swinging over the old bank. Cross's name had been chiseled out, but the scar remained. She reached for Silas's hand. "We didn't fight to keep looking over our shoulders. If they come again, we end it." He squeezed her hand. Together, like always. They rode home under a blood-orange sky. The children ran to meet them at the gate, unaware of the shadow following the horizon. That night, Evelyn tucked them into bed with a story, not of princes or angels, but of courage, of a woman who learned to stand when the world told her to kneel, of a man who believed she could. When she finished, her daughter whispered, "Mama, is that story true?" Evelyn smiled. "Every word, sweetheart. Now sleep. The morning's waiting." Later, when the house was quiet, she found Silas sitting by the window cleaning his rifle. "You really think they'll come?" she asked. He glanced up. "I think men like Eamon Cross don't know how to quit, but this time, we're not the ones running." She joined him, resting her hand on his. "Then we make them understand that." The attack came at dawn 2 weeks later, quick, ugly, and desperate. Eamon's men had none of the discipline of Miles's old crew. They fired wild, more noise than aim. Evelyn and Silas met them from the porch, two seasoned fighters who'd already survived hell once. The fight was short. A few warning shots, a few bodies fleeing back into the trees. When the smoke cleared, Eamon Cross lay face down in the dirt, his revolver empty, his hatred finally spent. Silas reloaded slowly, then lowered his gun. "Guess that's the last of them." Evelyn stood beside him, calm, steady. "It ends here." He nodded. "Here and nowhere else." That summer was the kind that makes legends fade into stories. The land healed again, wildflowers covering the scars left by bullets. People stopped by from miles around, new settlers, travelers, mothers with children, to ask how they'd done it, how two people could fight the world and win. Evelyn never bragged. She'd just smile and say, "We fought for what mattered, and what mattered fought back." Sometimes, when the day was long and the sun burned red over the prairie, she'd tell the story aloud, while Silas mended harness by her side. She'd tell of the runaway widow and the soldier with haunted eyes, of the gunfire that bound them and the peace they carved with their own hands. Each telling ended the same way, with her turning to him and saying, "We found home, didn't we?" And he'd answer, "We made it." Years later, when Silas's hair had turned silver and their children had children of their own, Evelyn sat alone on that same porch, watching dusk swallow the hills. The air was soft and golden, filled with the hum of crickets. A photograph hung by the door, a younger pair, dust on their faces, light in their eyes. She could almost hear him beside her still, his laugh deep and warm. 15 guns, Evie," he used to say, "and you never flinched." She smiled at the memory. "Because you taught me not to." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain from far-off mountains. She closed her eyes and listened. Somewhere, a storm was breaking, but it no longer frightened her. Love had taught her how to stand, and standing had taught her how to live. As the first drops fell, Evelyn whispered a quiet prayer, not of fear, but of gratitude. For the land that held their story, for the man who'd given her a life worth fighting for, and for every soul who'd ever believed that redemption was possible, even on the edge of the world. She rose, steady despite her years, and walked inside where the lamplight waited. On the table lay the silver ring Silas had made long ago from a spent bullet. She slipped it on, felt the familiar weight, and smiled through tears. "Till the next sunrise, love," she murmured. "I'll see you there." The door closed softly behind her. Outside, the prairie sighed, endless and free, the way it had been when they first met, the way it would remain long after names faded into dust. Because some stories never end. They just keep riding on the wind. If you've ever believed that love can rise from ashes and forgiveness can grow where blood once fell, subscribe and share this story. Let someone else remember that even in the harshest places, hearts can still find home.